conquest. She lives there for some time, and along with her, I think, well, commentators vary as to whether it's her uncle or a cousin. I'll probably go with uncle. She lives there with her uncle, who has brought her up as his own daughter because her parents were both killed in probably one of these conflicts. The queen of the nation decides to disobey her husband and is immediately relegated to who knows where. She's sent to Coventry, I think is the more modern phrase, but don't know that Coventry existed in those days, but she was sent there anyway. And so she's out of the picture, gone, and the king is lonely and decides that he needs a new queen. So rather than just promote somebody out of the standard harem stock, they decide that they will go for a beauty contest and find the most beautiful woman in the country, and she will become the queen. And so the competition happens. Finally, there are numbers of selections who are all put into harem number 1. Harem number 2's after you get to be the queen. Harem number 1 is beforehand, and they spend 1 year being prepared for the job of being queen, and then one of them will be selected. Esther is selected as the most beautiful woman in the country. So now, in episode 2 or 3, I can't remember which of Esther, we find that there's an enemy in the camp who has decided he's going to wipe out all of Esther's nation, which are Jews. And so he, primarily out of his extreme hatred for Esther's uncle, he's going to wipe out the entire nation. He's got the law changed, unintended consequences, because whoops, that means if we kill them, we're going to end up killing the queen. King not happy. And so we pick it up at the point where the threat is becoming imminent and the Jews are beginning to find out what's going on. Chapter 4, verse 1. Thanks, Belinda. When Mordecai learned what had been done, he ripped his clothes to shreds, Mordecai being Esther's uncle, and put on sackcloth and ashes. Then he went out in the streets of the city crying out loud and bitter cries. He came only as far as the king's gate, for no one dressed in sackcloth is allowed to enter the king's gate. As the king's order was posted, in every province there was a loud lament among the Jews, fasting, weeping, wailing, and most of them stretched out on sackcloth ashes. Esther's maids and eunuchs came and told her. The queen was stunned. She sent fresh clothes to Mordecai so he could take off his sackcloth, but he wouldn't accept them. Esther called for Hathash. Okay, you do better. Hathash will do, won't it? Hath. We would say hath. Ache. Anyway, one of the royal eunuchs whom the king had assigned to wait on her, and told him to go to Mordecai and get the full story of what was happening. So Hathash went to Mordecai in the town square in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him. He also told him the exact amount of money that Haman had promised to deposit into the royal bank to finance the massacre of the Jews. It's a good way to get the king to do something, isn't it? Pay for it. Mordecai also gave him a copy of the bulletin that had been posted in Suse, ordering a massacre so he could show it to Esther. When he reported back with instructions to go to the king and intercede and plead with him for her people, Hathash came back and told Esther everything Mordecai had said. Esther talked it over with Hathash and then sent him back to Mordecai with this message. This becomes very important in our story for today. Everyone who works for the king here, and even the people out in the provinces, knows that there is a single fate for every man or woman who approaches the king without being invited: death. The one exception is if the king extends his gold scepter, then he or she may live. And it's been 30 days since I've been invited to come to the king. When Hathash told Mordecai what Esther had said, Mordecai sent her this message: don't think that just because you live in the king's house, you're the one Jew who will get out of this alive. If you persist in staying silent at a time like this, help and deliverance will arrive for the Jews from someplace else, but you and your family will be wiped out. Who knows? Maybe you were made queen for just such a time as this. Esther sent back her message to Mordecai. Go and get all the Jews living in Suse together. Fast for me. Don't eat or drink for 3 days, either day or night. I and my maids will fast with you. If you do this thing, I will go to the king, even though it is forbidden. If I die, I die. Mordecai left and carried out Esther's instructions. 3 days later, Esther, dressed in her royal robes, took up a position in the inner court of the palace in front of the king's throne room. The king was on his throne, facing the entrance. When the queen noticed Esther standing in the court, he was pleased to see her. The king extended the golden scepter in his hand. Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. The king asked, "And what's your desire, Queen Esther? What do you want? Ask, and it's yours, even if it's half of my kingdom." Esther finds herself here in a precarious position. If she goes to the king without an invitation, she dies. If she doesn't, her whole nation dies. She's been thrust into this position as a result of the beauty pageant in which she was enrolled by her uncle Mordecai. If ever Esther needed to know exactly who she was, now is that time. If she falters here, she dies, and so do her people. She needs to be very, very confident of who she is right now. This story is a picture of us with our God. Our entry into His presence is no longer dependent on Him because He's done everything necessary. We have to be confident in who we are so that we know we can walk into the presence of God without fear. We need to know who we are. I want to bring 3 quick points to you today. I should never say quick, actually. I've noticed that every preacher says I'm going to preach for a short time, usually goes for an hour and a half to 2 hours. So I'll try and break that record and go for 3. First of all, be confident in God's constant presence. Right now for Esther, the mission seems impossible. No one, not even the queen, can just walk into the throne room of the king. You've got to wait to be invited. And the king hasn't invited her for 30 days. She hasn't seen him for 30 days. She's got to now walk in faith, in the love that he has had for her and in the authority that she has as the queen. And so she now has to walk in faith, hoping, believing that the favor of the king will still be upon her as it used to be. She needs to be confident right now. There's another law in this nation. They seem to have a lot of laws. There's another law in this nation that says if you come in before the king with a sad face or with bad news, you could be off with your head, Henry. And so she has to walk in. Though she's going to obviously struggle, she's got to walk in confidently into that place because she wants to be able to talk to the king. Let me tell you today, you and I need to know exactly who we are, and we need to have confidence in God's constant presence. We need to realize as Christians that we can walk into the presence of God at any time. We need to realize, in fact, even beyond that, that everywhere we go, the presence of God is with us. You don't have to go somewhere to get the presence of God. If you go back into the Old Testament, that's what they had to do. They had to go somewhere to get the presence of God, to go to the temple, go to the altar in order to meet with God. We don't even have to do that, though it's good to come together as Christians and so on. We don't have to do that. People will say to you, find a place and a time where you can meet God each day. And that's a good thing to do. I'm not knocking it. But you don't have to go to that particular chair. You don't have to go to that room. I've got a couple of spots where I'll go for a few days when I really want to touch God, and I know that I generally meet God there. But is it because that's where God is? No, it's because that's where I've got an attachment to that causes me to sense His presence more than another place. You don't have to go to a special place. He is with you at all times, and we've got to come to that point of confidence. Oh, but I haven't heard from God for 30 days. He hasn't invited me into his presence for a long, long time. I've been there, folks. I understand that. I understand that there are times when you feel as if God has forsaken you. There are times when you don't hear his voice for a long time. I remember once as a pastor trying to minister in a church. I remember once going for 2 years when I couldn't clearly say that I was hearing from God. It's a devastating place to be. And I'm not talking about hearing an audible voice. I'm talking about the still small voice, the whisper, the sense, the understanding. I went for 2 years. But you know what? We can't allow that to affect us. We haven't been invited for 2 years. Facts of the matter are, you have every right, every moment of every day to walk into the presence of God, invited or not. There are times in the Christian life when it seems that God has withdrawn. But if he has technically withdrawn from you and no longer walks with you, then he really can no longer be God. Let me tell you why. Because in Hebrews 13:5, it says these words, I will never leave you or forsake you. Sounds like a promise to me. You know God can't go back on his word. If he goes back on his word, he's not God. He can't do it. He can't tell a lie. So when he said, I will never leave you, see, some of us make the big statement, I will never, I will always, and fall short of that. But God can't do that, because when he makes a promise, it becomes part of him. He has to do that then, because he's promised. And so when God says, I will never leave you or forsake you, that means, when I really study the Greek to find out exactly what it means this: I will never leave you or forsake you. You actually don't need to be a theologian to understand that statement. You just need to be a person that says, I'm going to take God at his word. You may not have felt his presence for a long time, but his presence is constant. You may be going through a valley, but Psalm 23:4 says, even when I go through the darkest valley, I fear no danger, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. So even in the darkest of valleys, God's presence is there. You may not feel it. You may be a little bit overcome by the sense of darkness around you, but I want you to know God is there in the middle of the valley. You know, it goes on to say, he prepares a table for me in the presence of my enemies. You may feel that the army is coming against you. You may feel that everything's been rallied up to come after you and to get you. But let me tell you this, even in the midst of the charging army, God prepares you a banquet so you can sit and eat in comfort. And let the battle rage around you while he fights them off. Isaiah 43:1 says, don't be afraid, for I have ransomed you. You know, I'm not sure how you are with your property, but I'm fairly careful with mine. When I buy something, I look after it. Maybe not as well as somebody else might, but I certainly do keep an eye on it. If ever you've borrowed my car, and don't even think about it, but if ever you've borrowed my car, you've heard me say, here's the keys, drive it like it was mine. Just because you got your hands on my car doesn't mean I let go of it. It's mine, so you better drive it like it's mine. You know, it's mine, and I'm not about to, you know, we're very generous people with our home. This week we had 5 people in addition to us living in the place, and, you know, one even sleeping in the garage. And we're generous with our home, but you must mess with it, and I'm not about to start handing the keys out to every Tom, Dick and Harry. God has ransomed us. You think he just tosses us around like rag dogs? Or dolls, rather, and lets us just whatever? He says, don't be afraid, for I have ransomed you. I have called you by name. Listen to this. You are mine. Even when God allowed Satan to be let loose on Job, he put limits. because Job was his. It goes on, when you go through deep waters. Anyone ever been through deep waters? I'm not talking, you may have been flooded or whatever, but I'm not talking that specifically. When you go through deep waters, I will be with you. When you go through rivers of difficulty, you will not drown. When you walk through the fire of oppression, you will not be burned up. The flames will not consume you. Sometimes those kinds of things, the rivers or the deep waters and the rivers and the fires, they get pretty strong and pretty hard, and you feel like you're going to be washed away, drowned or burned up. But let me tell you, while they might knock you around a little bit, He's not going to allow you to be destroyed by them, because you're His. He's ransomed you. And in verse 4 He says, you are precious to me. You are honored, and I love you. So what we have to do is rest in the fact that He is with us at all times. Hebrews 4:16 says, therefore, let us approach the throne of grace with boldness, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us at the proper time. In other words, just walk into His presence. When our kids were little, I was a big shot and had a very prominent, well-placed office and did a lot of very, very private business in there. But if my kids arrived at the office, they often didn't knock. We tried to teach them, but they just got something they're busting to tell Daddy. They would just fling the door open and in they would come. And I might get a little frown on my face, but generally I'd take a break, get them up on my lap. Hello, how are you? What are you? Yeah, okay, off you go. And then, sorry, folks. My wife knows right now, she knows this fact, that at any moment she can open the door of my office and walk in. She doesn't knock or doesn't have to knock. Some of you have experienced it. You might think she's rude. She's under my orders. She knows, for my protection, because of all you monsters out there. She knows, for my protection, she can literally just open the door and walk in. And as I said, has anyone experienced that? She just walked in without knocking? Oh, come on, where are you? Steffi, you have? Oh, good, thank you. So, Steffi, you're the only one I was worried about. And what makes you think that's about to change? That's how we can be with God. God's doing a lot of high and almighty business on that throne of His. But if ever you need to crawl up on His knee, you have the right to walk straight in. And you've got to get confident of that fact. You need to become aware of it. The second thing is that we need to be confident in His constant love. See, Esther was deeply loved by the king. He saw her and met her out of all these other people, and he just fell in love with her. She was the greatest. But does he still love her? He hasn't called for me for 30 days. Does he still love me? The moment Esther showed her face in that palace, the moment he spotted her, he demonstrated his love for her. His love was constant. It hadn't changed. Immediately, he extended the scepter and asked her, what do you want? You can have whatever it is you want. Immediately. Why? Because he loved her. We're just talking about a human being here, okay? We're talking about somebody who, in fact, has demonstrated a little bit of piggery. You know, the way he treated his former wife was not the nicest way to treat somebody, even though she was apparently a little bit of a rebel. But if you saw your husband that had been in a party for well over a week and the orders were to serve as much alcohol as anybody wants for a month, then maybe this creates a bit of a different image on what was going on in that room. And maybe you can understand a little bit of why she didn't want to go in there. So she's gone, off with her head or whatever. I don't know what happened to her. I think she was just banished. So we're talking about an ordinary man here. Comparing this to God is a little bit of a joke in some ways, isn't it? Listen to what the Bible tells us about God's love for us. We love him because he first loved us. He loved you. This was not because you expressed such incredible love to God that he couldn't resist you. He loved you before that. He loved you before you loved him. The Bible tells us in Romans 5:8, but God showed us his great love for us by sending Christ to die for us while we were still sinners. You know, you guys are all out there looking for the perfect woman. Got news for you, she ain't around, but you were out there looking for her. You know, some of you were looking for Miss Right, didn't realize her Christian name would be Always. You ladies are looking for the perfect man. You got less chance than we have of finding the perfect woman. And, you know, I'm only going to marry someone if they're perfect. Well, stay single because that's the way it's going to be. Let me warn you ahead of time in case you think you've found the perfect person. Stay single if that's your criteria, because you haven't found the perfect person. You've just found the person who's made up to be perfect. They look good right now. Try living with them. Ask Laureen. She found out real fast that this perfect person was a little less than perfect. That was a joke. Both sides. That is, that I wasn't perfect and that I'm more than a little less. But you see, he died for you when you were way less than perfect. He died for you while you were a sinner. He died for you. I don't know what you think Jesus then does with that. He loved you so much that he died for you while you were still a sinner. Why would you think he's going to turn his back on you because you tripped over one day? You were a wicked, vicious sinner. The whole bang lot of you were awful. And I was probably your leader then as well. But he died for us. What makes you think that because you dropped a swear word, or you did something you shouldn't, or thought something you shouldn't, or missed out on doing something you should have, what makes you think he's going to suddenly turn his back on you when he died for you when you were at your worst? His love for us never changes. And we need to become confident in the constancy of his love. You've got to be confident in it. I don't know how to say it. Just get it into your head and your heart. Because here's the deal. I have a magnificent wife. You may not agree with that, but you're entitled to your wrong opinions. And I'm not opinionated. You're entitled to my opinions. So I have a magnificent wife. She is just absolutely fantastic. Why was I telling you this? I don't know. Anyway, take it from me. It's great. There was a very good point coming there. Oh, she saw me. She married me when she had seen me in a live-in situation. We were in a residential college for 12 months. And then she also heard a lot of stories about who I'd been before I got to Bible college. And yeah, there were some stories. She knew all of that. I didn't hide much. Certainly didn't hide the bank balance. You can't hide nothing. She knew what I was like. She married me at my worst. Would take an incredible amount of credit for what she's turned me into. Why in the world would she ditch me now? She's put so much work and effort into me. Slaved over a hot saucepan. No, slaved the hot saucepan over me. She's done so much. Why would she reject me now? Jesus saw us all at our worst. He saw you ladies without your hair done. You know, your teeth in a glass next to the bed. He saw all of that. Why would he reject you now? Especially today, you look great. But why would he reject you? He loves you desperately. And the Bible uses the phrase, with an everlasting love. There's nothing I can do to make him love me more. There's nothing I can do to make him love me less. You've got to get that into your head. You've got to become confident in his constant love for you. Thirdly, be confident in his constant acceptance. This was the big deal for her. She's got to go in and get acceptance. She's got to be accepted. He has to hold out the royal scepter to her so that she can touch it. He has to say, please come in. When you come to my house and ring the doorbell, if it happens to be one of those days when it works, then you still don't come in just because you rang the doorbell. You don't ring the doorbell and walk in, do you? Oh, okay, you do. At my place, you don't. So you have to wait for the door to be open to you. And this is what Esther had to do. She had to wait for him to say, come on in. So from the inner court, she can look through the open door, and she can see the king seated on the throne at the end of the throne room. He looks out and he sees her standing in the court, and she pauses to see what the king will do. She's already violated the law. She's already gone too far. She's already broken the rules of the nation by stepping into this place. What's going to happen? But her faith in his love was rewarded. He protected her from the law. He banished the law for the moment. He superseded the law. Does any of this sound a little bit familiar? You see, way back years ago, a long, long time ago, you and I could not go into the presence of God. There was a law that stopped us. We couldn't go into his presence. But one day, when Jesus Christ came into the world, he took away that law. He took away the barriers. He took away all of the things that stopped us from coming in. And he threw his arms wide open. And he said, now you don't have to have someone else to come in and plead for you. You can come directly into my presence yourself whenever you wish. Her intrusion was pardoned, and her visit was welcome. Esther 2:9 tells us that when he first saw her way back, before all of this, she found favor in the king's sight. She's found that favor again. Had it changed? No. He loved her, and he welcomed her. When Jesus died on the cross, he removed every barrier to us coming into his presence. Hebrews 10:19 again. So, dear brothers and sisters, we can boldly enter heaven's most holy place. Did you hear the word? Boldly. We can boldly enter heaven's most holy place because of the blood of Jesus. By his death, Jesus opened a new and life-giving way through the curtain into the most holy place. Keep saying the most holy place. I think probably because the most holy place was the place we were not allowed to go into. One man, once a year, could go into the holy place. And yet it keeps saying that we can go into the holy place. Since we have a great high priest who rules over God's house, listen to this, let us go right into the presence of God with sincere hearts, fully trusting him. For our guilty consciences have been sprinkled with Christ's blood to make us clean, and our bodies have been washed with pure water. We can walk right in. It's in his book. It's in the rules. For those of you who are a little like myself who live by rules, it's in the rules. Let us go right in to the presence of God with sincere hearts, fully trusting him. It's one of the rules of the kingdom. In fact, by bursting into the throne room, you aren't violating anything. You're violating more by holding off. You're violating the beautiful love and openness of our God by holding back. By walking straight in, you're saying, God, I accept everything you've done for me. And so we need to be confident in his constant acceptance. Ephesians 1:6 says, to the praise of the glory of his grace by which he made us accepted in the beloved. He made us accepted. Did you hear that? He made us accepted. It's nothing you've done. That's the point. You can sit in your seat right now and say, but it doesn't work for me because of this, or I didn't do that, or I shouldn't have done the other. That doesn't have any bearing on your acceptance. Probably what it has bearing on is your feeling of the acceptance. Because when we do, if I do something to offend my wife, then kind of next time I see her, I'm possibly wondering what's going to happen now. And so I put the barrier there by my behavior, not she putting it there. And she's just, no, I shouldn't say that. I was going to say she's just a human being. I'm not quite sure what to say, but we're comparing a very, very, not just a human being, but a very, very well-made human being with the one true living God who has made us accepted. He has done whatever is necessary so that you can, every moment of your life, walk into the presence of God. Let me just quickly tell you where this takes Esther. Because Esther went in, Mordecai's archenemy, who had already built the gallows to hang Mordecai on, was exposed, and he ends up hanging on the gallows that were built for Mordecai. Mordecai, who Haman, the enemy, was trying to destroy, is promoted not to Haman's position, but even beyond that. The king had not given Haman the authority that he gave to Mordecai. But if I can use a little bit of possible license, when you go into the book of Nehemiah, if you've read it very carefully, you will notice that the what we call now the prophet Nehemiah is distressed by what he's hearing is going on back in his homeland, Jerusalem, his home city, where the walls of the city have all been destroyed. He's distressed by it, and he also comes into the king's presence. The very same king comes into the king's presence with a miserable look on his face. And this king says to Nehemiah, what's the problem? But if you read very carefully, we can tend to glance over things. And I was surprised when my perfect wife said, I hadn't seen that bit before. It says these... I'm just trying to get out of trouble in case I did make a mistake before. It says these words: the king sitting on his throne with the queen beside him. With his queen beside him. This is sometime later now, but some commentators say that was most probably Esther sitting next to the same king when Nehemiah comes in. So not only has Esther, because of her approach to the king, been able to save her nation from being destroyed in captivity, but now, in addition to that, she has acquired, and if you read what the king said was to happen, he sent Nehemiah back to his homeland. He sent billions of dollars worth of gold and silver and steel and timber and animals and everything. He said they have to be provided with everything needed to rebuild the walls, and then he even sent bodyguards and soldiers along to protect them as they went. The queen sitting beside him, who's found favor in his sight, perhaps has softened this man's heart now towards the Jewish people, and he's able to reach out and meet their needs when they have another crisis. You see, this woman who it seems just entered a beauty contest to get into a good position, actually saves her nation and then ends up being partially responsible for the restoration of the walls of Jerusalem. Let me say Esther wasn't the queen because she was beautiful. She was actually made beautiful so she could become the queen. She had a purpose in life for which she was born. And her confidence, you see, here's the point. Her confidence in her relationship with the king, even though she hadn't sensed his presence for 30 days, her confidence in her relationship with the king, knowing I'm the queen here, I have a certain relationship, knowing that meant that the purpose for which she was born, the purpose for which she was made to be who she was, can now come to pass, and she's able to achieve her destiny and bless many other people. And here I go again, I can hear people saying, but that was the great Queen Esther. No, that was a little girl that was taken captive after her parents had died and just grew up to say, if I die, I die, but I'm going to do what God's called me to do. And she had no idea. There would be no way she could have known that she was going to be used in such an incredible way. So don't dismiss the heroes of the scriptures. Esther could well have been written up in Hebrews 11 as a great person of faith, but so could you if you would just learn who you are and walk in the steps that God has provided for you. Lord Jesus, sitting before you are a bunch of beautiful people, people who have your favor, people whom you have made beautiful for the task that is before them, people, oh God, who you've smiled upon, people who you've ransomed, people who you have made acceptable. And as these very people bow before you, I pray that they will feel your smile. They will sense your love. They will walk in your presence. And that day by day, by day by day, every moment of every day, we will become confident in your presence, in your love, in your acceptance, because all of those things are constant. They never change. They never change. Lord, help us to not just walk out and say good or bad sermon, but let us walk out with a revelation of the constancy of your love, of your presence, and your acceptance. And may we, made beautiful for a purpose, go ahead and fulfill that very purpose so that other people's lives, because no purpose of God on our life is for our benefit. The purpose of God in our life is for the benefit of other people. So may we change our world with your reality, Jesus, because we know the reality of who Jesus is. Keep your heads bowed, keep your eyes